6-foot table talk as we find out who walks the walk. It's the bane of our existence to practice social distance. 6-foot table talk.
Hello and welcome to 6-Foot Table Talk, a series bringing civil discourse and understanding back to the table. My name is Nigel Eastman and I am honored to be your host. But this series is not about me. This series is about the conversation. So let the talk begin.
Hello, welcome to Connecting with Children COVID Style. My name is Jane Clanahan and I'm a retired school counselor. And my partner here is Carrie Newman, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist who works with Wellspring and with our Journey of Hope. So we're here to kind of talk about what's going on with our children right now during COVID. The last 3 weeks, I have had the opportunity to teach first grade with my granddaughter. And it was a unique and wonderful experience in that our roles were so different from what they normally are. You know, because usually at my house, she gets to do whatever she wants to anytime she wants to. But this time she had to be online. I had to make her do her work. And it was just a different experience. And I know that that's happening to a lot of families right now. So my question is, how do we help our kids in this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing to remember is that we are all experiencing loss right now. Loss of familiar routines, loss of our consistency, loss of what feels normal. And for kids, that manifests really differently than sometimes we as adults expect. And so now that kids are back in school, and whether that is in virtual school or in-person school, there's a little bit of semblance of what is familiar, but it's all layered within this loss experience. And so I think the most important thing to remember at this point is we all have this loss experience. Our kids are feeling that very deeply, and that there are some really great ways that we can support that expression of grief and find patience and understanding in walking alongside them through that journey that we are all going through right now.
When I was a counselor, one of the things that I always would talk with my teachers about at school was that loss is different. And when we had a student that was going through loss, I wanted them to understand that it can mean different things to different students. And I always would explain to my teachers that, you know, I'm 60 years old and my mom died 15 years ago, but there are still moments of time right now where I am overwhelmed with grief. And there's so many losses our kids are experiencing. The loss of sports the way they know it, the loss of seeing their friends. You know, the high schools are alternating days, and there's a lot of things. How can parents help our children through that?
Absolutely. So the first thing that I would suggest parents to do is to normalize that expression of grief and the expression of emotions. So you are spot on in saying that kids are going to show that grief differently. It's going to persist, and it will come up sometimes in even really surprising moments and times. And so really giving words for the kids. And that could look like name it to tame it. So name it to tame it is a phrase that we love, where we want to give kids the words to express their emotions and to help them feel like they have a better sense of what's going on in their bodies, what's going on in their minds. So giving them the emotional language and really building that up can be so powerful for kids, especially if emotional language isn't something that is commonly talked about in your household. So really kind of building that up. And that can be done by watching movies and saying, oh my goodness, they look really sad right now. I'm wondering how they may feel otherwise or what's going on, and just kind of throwing out those moments and not expecting a return or even your kid to say, yes, that's exactly how I feel, because more than likely they may say, no, that's wrong. You don't understand me. But you're helping that child feel seen and heard because you're naming their experiences for them, and they are able to help make better sense of what's going on inside and internally.
You know, I think sometimes when children are grieving, or what I've seen, is their reactions to things are sometimes over the top, and you're like, wow, where's this coming from? You know, and so talk to me a little bit about discipline and helping Because there's still rules that children have, and there's still expectations. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so what you are describing is a grief burst. A grief burst is when an innocuous event, so say your kids are playing and all of a sudden a fight breaks out and a child is really upset and then they're crying and they're sobbing and you feel their pain. They are upset and they're talking about how things are not fair. It's not okay. How can the world be like this? And you think, how do you go from fighting with your sibling to sobbing about the way the world is? That is a grief burst. So these layers of emotions are sitting right underneath the surface for our kids all the time, just like they are for us as adults. So these little moments are going to come up, and lean into those spaces, lean into the moments of that emotional expression, and discipline and consequence can come later. So connection before correction is another phrase that I really like, where we are focusing on the basics, focusing on the relationship, nurturing that space with your child, leaning in the discomfort of the emotions and the experiences, knowing that consequences, discipline, all of that can still be talked about, but when their logical brain is back online. So I don't know about you, but when I'm really upset and someone tries to give me advice or tell me what to do, it's hard for me to really hear that or understand what's going on. And so I need some time to kind of pause and experience my emotions and understand what's happening before I can take that deep breath and move forward into the next kind of opportunity for connection, which might be redirection or the discipline or the consequence or just having a conversation about everything. And so I think it's kind of a hard conversation to talk about, but acknowledging the emotions first and connecting first, nurturing that relationship, and then knowing that the discipline, the conversations, all that can come at a later moment.
Is there something that they can do beforehand to set the stage for joy, maybe?
Yeah, so I think knowing that all of these emotions that your kids are experiencing is normal. So the fear, the worry, the depression and anxiety, the overwhelm, the exhaustion, the lack of motivation and concentration, the intrusive thoughts, they're all normal expressions of grief for children. And when you can set the stage and let your kids know, hey, you might be experiencing some of these things, it's normal, even though it's uncomfortable, let's give some space and opportunity to talk about that and be aware of when you feel like these things are really bubbling up inside. So then you are setting the stage for it's okay to talk about emotions in our family. Our emotional expressions are okay as well. And we can still delight in each other. We can still enjoy each other while still talking about the hard stuff, because that's going to be part of building resilience over time with children. And so creating these opportunities for connection through hard moments may look like a 10, 20, 10. So 10 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon, and 10 minutes before bed. And that is opportunity for lighthearted conversations, games, just talking about easy things where there's not a desire to solve a problem or to give a lecture or to try to remedy whatever's happening, but true moments for delight and connection. And it's not a lot to expect. 10 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon, and 10 minutes at night, that's manageable. And that is good enough. That's good enough parenting. And I can't express that enough of we're not looking for perfect, we're looking for good enough, especially right now during COVID time.
Sometimes it's hard to tell when, our children feel stress all the time, whether we're in COVID or not. And, an appropriate amount of stress is good. It's okay to be nervous about school starting tomorrow or nervous about, when you have to give that report. Where does it become concerning? What are some things that parents can look for that would indicate there needs to be more help?
Absolutely. And you bring up such a good point, because while all of those emotions are normal responses to grief and change, when they impede daily living and they prevent kids from being successful in school, that's where you know, hey, maybe we need to reach out and get some extra support. So that may look like those intrusive thoughts may keep kids from being able to concentrate in school or get good sleep at night. It may look like thoughts of harming themselves or behaviors of self-harm. It could look like expressions of, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to deal with this. I'm over it. And just sort of some helplessness. It also can fall on a spectrum of being withdrawn, which is sort of normal for teenagers. We'll own that. But when they have completely disengaged from everything that was familiar or those relationships, and there's some really deep strains happening. So you've got this withdrawn spectrum to the perfectionist spectrum. And that may be a kid who's turning everything in and they're doing great, but you see some breaks in that perfectionism when they miss an assignment and they lose their cool, or they're so hard on themselves that when they don't get something down perfectly, they feel very guilty. They beat themselves up about it. All of those are that manifestation of anxiety. And those are definitely some flags where we would encourage families to seek support, whether that is through counseling at the Wellspring Counseling Center or somewhere else that feels safe and comfortable. But we also want to acknowledge that even if you don't have these red flags, it's okay to seek counseling too, to give your kids space to process and adjust to everything that's changing in their life. So you may think, our family's doing all right. We are managing appropriately. We're doing okay, but maybe I still want to provide my child some opportunities to just talk about everything that's going on. That is okay to do as well. So it's important that families know that when your kids are exhibiting some of these red flags, these really concerning behaviors, to reach out, but it's also okay to reach out when you just need a safe place to process everything that's going on, because that's the goal of counseling, is to open up a safe place.
Great. Let's say a student is not to the point where they're withdrawn, but they're having a hard time managing the changes. What are are there some practical things that parents can do, schedule-wise, or to help out our children?
So I know a lot of families are battling what the school expectations are for virtual and in-person requirements, as well as how do we help our kids' mental health at home. And so really creating some routine and flexible structure. And we say that because we know that things change. We have to be kind of willing to adjust and adapt very quickly as things in our world move very quickly. And so letting your kids know, setting up the expectation that we're going to create some structure and some guidelines to help you, because we know that when kids feel that ambiguity, the unknown, when things aren't clear, their anxiety, their symptoms of grief are going to feel even bigger. So creating the consistency and the structure at home can help lessen some of those behaviors and emotional responses, because it gives children something to look forward to, something that they know to be true, to be consistent. And that can be just really, really helpful.
Great. Is there any other questions that anyone or anything else you'd like to share?
Absolutely. I think the last two things would be important to talk about is, as parents, to really lead with grace and patience. So this is a really challenging time. There are so many layers to everything that our families are experiencing right now, things that we could talk about forever, because we know that our families experience struggles at this time. And so as parents, we could set the tone by leading and creating space and modeling that healthy emotional expression, patience with each other as we are acknowledging all of these changes, and really building in some of those resilient skills and coping skills. And the last thing is to not forget to identify all the strengths, the great things about your kids. When things are really struggling, when we are frustrated, when we're irritated, when we are feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, which a lot of people probably are sitting in that state right now, it's hard to remember the good things. And so we want to always keep in mind the wonderful things that we know to be true about our kids, and build on those things. If you know that your kid does something well, see how you can integrate that in the day, so you are helping to build their self-esteem and their confidence as well during this time of unknown.
That is so true, and I will tell you the experience with Holly, getting to spend that 3 weeks with her. I saw a side of her I'd never seen before, and several sides, and I saw the frustration, because normally we don't see frustration at my house. So I saw her frustration, and it was also good to see how she was able to help herself handle that frustration by taking a minute, and she was able to calm herself. A 6-year-old, I was pretty impressed with that. And so I think it's noticing those things about our children, the things that they know already, and reinforcing those is so valuable. And commenting on those positive things we all love to be complimented, right? So our children are going to feel the same way.
Absolutely. And anything that we can do to bolster that self-esteem, that self-confidence when we know the child may be struggling in many ways are great opportunities for connection and nurturing that relationship and helping your child feel seen and heard, which is invaluable.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, Carrie, you've given us a lot of good information. Thank you so much. I also am a great fan. You mentioned counseling, and that counseling doesn't mean you're ill. It doesn't mean that you have no friends. It just is a good way to refocus your thoughts and give yourself some direction. So would you talk just a little bit about Wellspring and what's available there?
Absolutely. So the Wellspring Counseling Center provides counseling services for anyone in the community with reasonable rates. And we, as counselors, it's our job to create a safe place for families to explore their emotions, to process all of those changes, and provide space to build coping skills and resiliency. So if you feel like your family is struggling and needs extra support during this time, please feel free to reach out to the Wellspring Counseling Center, and we would be happy to support you and your family as you are on this journey right now.
If you found this episode of 6 Foot Table Talk to be a blessing or a breath of fresh air, then I encourage you to give online. Whenever you give online, it gives us resources to continue creating quality content just like this. So for now, hit that give button, and I will see you next week for our next 6 Foot Table Talk.
6 Foot Table Talk. As we find out